Today, I just really want to give you a sort of a high-level overview of some ideas and some tips that you can take back so that when you are doing your next tender, these things can spark some ideas that you can put into the various tenders that you are responding to. All right, does this ring a bell? RFI, RFP, RFQ, EOI. I think some of us eat, sleep, and breathe these terms. Long nights, when that salesperson walks in and puts that tender on your desk and says, I need this by tomorrow at 12 o'clock to be submitted, and your team has to work till 12, 2 o'clock in the morning. The coffee comes out, the matchsticks go in, and all we do is we work on these tenders. I'm sure that sounds very familiar to everybody sitting here. You see this person in the passage, in your organization, you know that they are responsible for a tender. It's always piles and piles of information that we have to get out. If you take it away from that person, you must probably see their eyes closed and they're walking around like a robot. Right, just to get an understanding of this audience who's looking a bit glum here today, hands up if you have submitted a tender or worked on a tender in the last month. Sure, I love it. And keep your hands up if you've worked on a tender in the last 2 weeks. Okay. And who's currently working on a tender? Okay, so you can I really feel your pain, especially when you've got to do this and do the tender part-time. Right, I think for everybody, the goal of a first-class proposal and for every opportunity that we tender, we don't want to tender for the sake of tendering. We want to tender because we really want to win that work. So I think your tender number one has to be customer-focused, okay? It must tell a very compelling story to the person who's evaluating it. It must contain a clear strategy and various themes that you may have picked up. Those must flow through your tender. We must differentiate ourselves from the competitors. Tendering is a very competitive game. So how do we raise the bar so that we're seen above our competitors? Please, it must be complete and error-free. There's nothing worse than reading a tender and there's a huge spelling mistake, or you're tendering to University of PE, and in the meantime, it's actually a tender for the University of Witwatersrand. In your tender, it says University of Witwatersrand. Please be careful about things like that. Your tender will be thrown straight into that dustbin immediately. It must be a joy to read. There's nothing worse than looking through a tender and everything is disorganized and it hasn't got a great theme. Easy to evaluate. Often put a compliance matrix right up front on the exact requirements that the tenderer has asked for, what their reference is and what your reference is in the document. It just makes it easier. They see their compliance and they know that you've thought this through very clearly. You need to speak with one voice. Often tenders are put through from various departments in your organization and they don't talk to each other. And it sounds like you're two different organizations in one tender. So be careful of that. Have a proofreader or somebody who's overall in charge to bring it all together. It must be appropriately approved, okay? I think that's a big problem. Sometimes tenders are done overnight. Nobody checks it, goes out, and it's got errors or contractual issues that you haven't even thought about. What are the implications of that to you as an organization? It must have a professional look and feel. It mustn't look like a dog's breakfast. It's not a teacher that you're giving your homework to and you can say, oh, look, the dog ate it. These people are professionals. I'm not saying teachers aren't professionals, and they're not going to take those excuses lightly. Right. Oops, jump 2. I'm just going to give you 10 tips, which I think are very important that you can take home. And the first one is the me proposal. Me, and I. And I think you need to look at your tenders and see who is mentioned more in your proposal, you or the customer. And I think you'll find most companies, we love to blow our trumpets, and the very first sentence is, we, so-and-so, can do this, that, etc. The customer is not that interested. They have already most probably checked you out. They know who you are. The important thing is to understand what your customer's needs are, and they need to be mentioned in the proposal more than your own company. The left-hand rule. Take a page from your proposal and run your finger down the left-hand side of that page. And I challenge you to go home today or maybe next week and do that. And I guarantee you that you will find your name mentioned more times than the customer, and the customer will be lucky to actually be mentioned in that space. All right. So always run your finger down the left hand of a page, especially those who review the tenders. Great answers start with the customer's needs first, and then explain why you have the best solution for their actual needs. A completeness test. Answer the full question. All right? Too often we start off and we do start a great tender, but we don't actually answer the question that the clients asked us. We tend to think that we know what we want. We haven't engaged with the client sufficiently, and the RFP, for me, if you have not engaged the client, that RFP often only has 1/3 of the information you really need to be able to respond correctly to that client. It's like an iceberg. 1/3 sits out the top, everybody knows about it. The 2/3 are only those who have that relationship with the client, and they really know what's going on. All right. Check that your answers fully address all parts of the customer's questions. All right. Avoid fudge statements. And this is unfortunately maybe from our education or the way we think. We believe that our team has the right mix of skills and experience for a project of this size and complexity. Now that is totally what we call in the industry a fudge statement. All right? We need to avoid them. Rather say our team has the right mix. Then we've been powerful about our statement. We've been confident in our skills that we can actually provide. So avoid saying we believe that, we think that, in our opinion, according to our understanding of. Those are very wishy-washy fudge statements. So try and not utilize those within your proposals. All right. Use active titles. Now, often we go into the client's document and we say our solution. That's great. But is that powerful and impactful? Why don't you rather say meeting your specifications? Immediately, that says something to the client. Team profiles. Rather say a skilled, experienced team to offer the services that we're going to offer you. Project plan. Very simple, but rather delivering the project on time means that you can deliver and you're going to deliver it on time. It means far more to the client. Prices. Excellent value for money. So these all tell the story at a glance, and it actually conditions the reader when he's reading, he or she reads your tender, to think in that line, and it's a more positive way of thinking. The origami proposal. All right, now we all know that a lot of the tenders we receive ask the same question 16 times or 3 times in various stages of the document. All right, but you need to answer those questions each and every time because the tender is laid out in a certain aspect. That tender may be split and different people evaluate it. So I don't want you doing this. Question 7. Our services are assessed to ISO 9001. We conduct detailed quality assurance audits on a regular basis and strive for continuous improvement. Then you get to question 25. See our answer to this in question 7. Do you think they're going to go back and look at question 7? Then you get to question 60. Don't respond. We'd kindly refer you to our answer to question 7, Appendix B, and the enclosed brochure. Now they've got to go and search once again for your answer. Question 90. We have already answered this in question 7. We're getting bored of seeing it in your RFP. You folks really don't get it, do you? By that stage, your tender's definitely in the dustbin. So answer it wherever you ask, no matter how frustrating it is. All right, challenge your answers. and maybe get somebody else to challenge the answers that you've put in there. So what? Why are we putting that in? Prove it. So if you made a statement, how can you prove it? And what are we really trying to say? Are we saying the right thing there? Okay. Top tip 8, what we call boilerplate in the industry, which is a copy and paste. And I spoke about it earlier. Don't copy something into somebody else's document and still leave all the names, etc. there. Rather tailor it to that particular client. I've actually been on some evaluation panels, and I've seen it firsthand where some other client's name is mentioned in a tender document, and the procurement people were livid. So just be careful of that. All right. We actually did a survey with people who evaluate tenders, and they said the proposal must address the needs of the purchasing organization and show creativity by producing innovative solutions. It must be a customized, not off-the-shelf solution. And often people can pick up when you just off-the-shelf solution, so really customize it. Evaluators were strong in agreement of their dislike of generic, non-tailored, cut-and-paste solutions. So just be aware of that. Top tip 9, appropriate differentiation. And this is really ghosting the competition. So you want to highlight yourself above the competition. You can't say, Joe Soap down the road is so bad at this and this and this and this. You can't do that. So you need to ghost it. So put up some of the awards that you've won, some of the positive things. We recently had a tender where the client had actually put out a graph which showed my company as the most cost-effective and efficient deliverer of the particular service, whereas everybody else was at the top. But it didn't mention names. So we could put that in, and that made some differentiation. All right? And then finally, the top tip 10, beware of acronyms, abbreviations, and jargon, because you may understand it, but your client may not understand it. So I think that's very important to bring that out there. Don't use, TLC and ROI and TCO and when they don't understand it. You can put a glossary of terms up front, and maybe they can, and which will give you what the abbreviations are, but those can also be difficult when you read in the document. All right, so I think your buzzwords, excessive acronyms, cliches, and jargon are very bad. But if you, the customer buzzwords, and you mirror the sort of language that they use in their document, then that's a good thing that you can do. Structuring the proposal effectively, a good covering letter, title page, then your contents, but keep your contents page to a minimum, just catchy things that come out of it. Your executive summary, I'll talk about that shortly. Your solution overview, if it's inappropriate in the tender document. Answer their questions in the order and format, and I spoke about that compliance table, very important. Conclusions, remind them of the key themes. Okay. Executive summaries, very key because they can explain your solution to the client. And the purpose of an exec summary, to blow me away so I can say yes, yes, yes. They really do understand my business and they really want it. And a good executive summary shows that not only do you understand my requirements, but why you are the one to deliver them. Okay, so these are extracts from people who have read executive summaries, and that's what they're looking for. And a very easy way, which is done by Dr. Tom Sant, who's a specialist worldwide on proposals, is what we call NOS. All right? Needs, that's how it starts out, your executive summary. Demonstrate understanding of the customer's key business issues. Outcomes, identify meaningful outcomes or results from meeting those needs, how you're going to meet them and what it's going to impact on the client. Solutions, recommend a specific solution to the client, not a wishy-washy one. And then evidence, build credibility by providing that evidence that's credible. These are questions that you can pose when you are reading that, because sometimes there's things in a proposal that you're not sure of. Why have they asked this question? We get all these questions. Do we ever ask why have they asked it? What is the purpose? What do we really need to respond, and how do we need to respond? What are their real underlying issues and concerns? And that, as I mentioned earlier, You're not necessarily going to get in the RFP. It's about engaging the supplier ahead. So in what we call the capture phase of a bid, when you know about the opportunity before the RFPs even come out, and that's just in your relationships with the client. Which members of the evaluation team will be particularly interested in that particular question? Who's posed that? Do you know who the evaluation team are? Who's it going to consist of? And that's also important when you create your tender. You don't want it to be too technical if you know there's procurement, legal, finance, and only one technical person sitting on the evaluation committee. Tailor it accordingly. How important is that question to them? You need to rank the questions. What competitive advantage can we exploit? All right. And then what competitive disadvantage do we need to mitigate? So where are we lacking that maybe our competitors are over and above us? How do we mitigate that? Which of these themes can we bring out here? So you tend to look at various themes that you run through your executive summary and through your document. It must be that golden thread. And that you sit in what we call a kickoff meeting when you get that tender document with the team that's going to put that bid together. Which other questions are closely related? What pre-written content can we adapt? And if there was a question that mattered, what would we say? So it's all about thinking more clearly. I think too often we're under pressure, we're rushed for time, and so we just quickly slap a tender together without much thought. Rather, be more strategic and look for the tenders you know you stand a better chance of. Too many companies are just submitting anything and everything that says RFP, EOI, RFQ. All right.
The objective of my presentation is to show you what is the common mistakes that we find in tenders and also tips to consider. It might seem very familiar information. It might seem very information that is repeated, but I promise you it's the silly mistakes that gets you disqualified. And we often find very successful and also winning proposals that come through. And just because of a common mistake, you get disqualified. The main thing on our tenders is to prepare and plan for the tender sessions immediately or the moment you are able to purchase your tender document. Because this gives you an opportunity to prepare for the information sessions. The information sessions are very compulsory and relevant because it is here where you get a point of clarity. What happens is most of the time you buy the document the day before the info session, or you buy it after if the process allow you, and you miss out an opportunity on technical questions as well as process questions. So then you go back to your office and you are also limited because you won't have the opportunity to ask. Yes, there is also access to emails, but I think at the info sessions, you are given an opportunity to have more clarity and more input on that. Just remember that some of these tenders are high-value contracts, so you must take the initiative to put more effort in preparing your tender documents. Make sure that your documents, when you are compiling your documents, if they ask you to initial each page, please do so. You might have a document that has got 200 pages, and one of the document is unsigned. You would be disqualified. Make sure that the person that has proxy to sign the document is the very same person that is signing throughout the tender document, because it's another area of mandatory that is required for you. And this is something that we check at our offices and is also checked at the institutions as well. Another common mistake, and this seems to be more often than ever, where we get calls. If the tender closes at 12 o'clock, you get a phone call at 5 to 12 and you hear, I'm just around the corner, can you please wait? Unfortunately, at the info session in the tender document, no there will be no exceptions. This is a rule and it is a tender process, so you have to respect the process. Whether there is where you were in an accident, traffic, there will be no excuses that will be entertained. So please prepare to submit your tender document before the time. If you are using a courier services, please don't use it the day before. Always plan, because the tender box is often open at most institutions 24 hours. At PURCO office, that's during the office hours. So you don't need to send your document on the day of closing. Another common mistake is that in some tenders, they ask for samples, certification. I'm not moving. They ask for sample certifications, and if they ask you to attach it to relevant sections in the document, we found they are misfiled in where you present your document. This is also a common mistake. If they ask you to supply a sample, please be relevant to the question that is being asked. When we receive tender documents, there's a process that happens, and the mandatory is a first stage where you are actually going through a sifting criteria. It's an ERDL requirement where you ask to have your tax clearance certificates, your BE certificates, and these has to be valid, they has to be current. We often get a letterhead saying that we're in the process of receiving from SARS. If that is the case, you need to get a verified letter, not a photocopy from them. As well, if your company is being in progress to being verified, you need to get, these has to be official documents. We won't be accepting any emails or any just a normal letter. It has to be authentic, verified documents that needs to be submitted. Always read through the documents carefully and make sure that you are submitting what is required in the document. It's important to do proper cost analysis when calculating your bid prices, because when pricing are calculated too high or too low, they can be considered as unresponsive. Remember that when we go out into the tender, there is some market intelligence, there is some bench exercises that are concluded, so we do have an understanding onto what the costing should be. So it's important that suppliers they know their market, know their areas, so when they submit the pricing, it should be in line or more or less in what the tender or the market is requiring. Complete the price schedules. If, for example, the price schedule annexure is an Excel document, please complete it in the Excel format, because there is a reason why it is required in that format. If you want to present an alternative pricing option, if the tender allows, do so, but please stick to what is required of you, because there is an evaluation, there's a formula, there's a reason why we want to compare this in terms of like on like, and we want to make sure that we are evaluating on formulas. It's difficult if you don't comply to the required format on pricing. Another common mistake that happens is references. We receive references where people are no longer contactable. And when you look at some of the functionalities, references are awarded points. And there is a time where we had a cutoff where we can no longer trace or contact the person. This is a disadvantage to you, where you will be marked or negatively. So please make sure when you're submitting references, these are people that are still contactable, they are still in that, the contact number is still relevant, because here you need to ensure that they are in place. If not, you will be marked negatively. In most PURCO tender documents, we have a functionality scorecard. This is a preview for the suppliers themselves. You can test yourself, you can score yourself, look at the criteria where you can know beforehand where you're going to meet. Most of our tenders, and it might not be general, but in most of our tenders, we have minimum thresholds. For example, 70 points. You can go and score yourself to ensure that you are complying to these requirements. It's critical that you go and have a look at these functionality criteria so that you respond adequately. And if there is templates for you to complete, and I like the point that Neil said, don't say, please refer to page 5 or see response, because it doesn't, there's a purpose of you completing each one. It has to be completed in full. And also make sure that your claims against each criterion are strong, clear, and concise. Another important, and from an evaluation perspective, is how you present your tender document. We would love to receive as much information, but it has to be relevant information to the tender document. If additional information is there, it's not restricted, but we will be looking at information that is relevant to the tender document. The way you package your tender document, your content page, your table. If we say, please attach your BE certificate under Appendix A, please put it immediately after Appendix A. Because this is where we want to have a uniform way of evaluating. We want to find it in an easier way, because we do welcome innovative tenders, we do welcome creative tenders, but sticking to the format assists us in evaluating and the process. It also saves us time from evaluators as well. PURCO SA, the contract managers, we always welcome our suppliers to our offices, where we have personal interaction with our suppliers, and we continue to make this a commitment from our office. So I would like to leave this now open for any questions, comments, or clarity.